This is a fly that I originated back in the 1980s, primarily for freshwater fishing. I tied it for small bass, never had a crayfish pattern before. I think this represents a small molting crayfish. That's what I think anyway. It's proved to be probably my most effective fly for bluegill, shellcracker, small bass, and tilapia that I've ever used, especially in a little bit deeper water. It's also been very effective for smallmouth bass. Up in Maine, the guides confiscated my flies. They call it the killer bug before I left. And I've been told it's pretty good for trout. I've had fair success with trout, but most of those are stock trout. I don't know how it would do on wild trout. And I've been told by guides that it's a very effective carp fly. A couple of years ago, I decided to try it for salt water, just on a whim, and was surprised at its effectiveness. Excuse me. It's very good for whiting, large pinfish, other small fish in the surf. That's where I had my first success with it. But it's taken some large fish for me. I've taken snook up to 30 inches on it. And also it seems to be pretty effective as a flats fly, using a little different retrieve. Normally I like to just get this on the bottom and bump it along slowly on the bottom, hopefully to represent a sand flea in salt water along the beach. On the flats, I tend to use a real short staccato strip, very short but very frequent strips. It's proven to be very effective for sheep's head. I've taken a number of good sheep's head, particularly off of South Lido, out of Big Pass. It's taken some nice large trout for me, over 20 inches. And it's taken, for some reason, I don't know why, large ladyfish, which I would not expect. And also, it's probably about the best bonefish fly I've ever used, both in Belize and in Bahamas. I don't think I've ever had a refusal from a bonefish on this fly that I could tell, and it seemed to be more effective than any other fly that I used. Start with the 1/64th ounce. I like the super jig head fly. It's available from Feathercraft, particularly for salt water. It has a little longer shank, gives a little longer fly, more body, which I think appeals to saltwater fish. I tied a freshwater version with a little more modest proportions. Smaller feelers, or crab, or legs, I would say, or claws. But otherwise, basically the same fly. I like to use monofilament tying thread. It's a pain in the neck to tie sometimes, and I often have difficulty with it. It's a slippery little dude. But it's a very strong thread, which I like. It seems to hold up very well. Does not absorb water. And from that standpoint, it seems very beneficial. Start behind the lead head and just wind the thread back to the bend of the hook. What I tie in next is woolly bug or chenille. Woolly bug or chenille I use because it's thicker, makes a fuller body. Also has a little bit of flash in it, which may not be a detriment. Tie it in good, all the way back to the bend of the hook. Fasten it down good. And then I take a good 3 to 4 firm wraps of chenille going forward towards the eye. And I generally tie it off at that point. Some people that are probably more skillful than me can leave that hanging and continue with the tying process. I am not that skillful, it gets in my way. Next step is I like schlap and feather for the claws. I've used other materials. You don't want anything too soft because it collapses when you're retrieving a fly and does not hold its shape, so it doesn't really look that good in the water. Schlap and feathers for me are, I've used a variety of materials, but I like schlap and feathers. Waspy is a good source for the schlap and feather. They have a good schlapping. Take off about an inch or so along one side of the stem. Pinch the fibers together, pull them out. Grab the butts and then tie them in. The length of the tail is up to you. I've generally had better luck with longer tails. However, I took my biggest trout on a shorter tail version. Put it in there and then pull tight. See how that flares, those fibers? Those fibers will stay flared at a 45-degree angle. That's highly desirable. I think the claws, which I think these represent, probably act as an outrider for the fly. They give stability to the fly. They allow it to ride upright all the time and keep it from twisting around. Make sure when you take off your fibers, you use an equal amount and equal length on each side. If you don't, there's a tendency for this to twist. If you keep that equal, you shouldn't have any problems. Tie some along the opposite side. Again, tight. That's why I like this monofilament thread, because you can really get good pressure on it. Comes out again at a 45-degree angle. I generally wrap the feathers a little bit forward to secure them fully, because you're going to catch a lot of small fish on this. Fish that will tend to pull the fibers out if they're not secured fully. I just wrap them off, tie it in a little better. I go back and take a little more chenille, tie it back in again, and wrap back towards the bend of the hook again, and then simply wrap forward on this. Make a nice body. If you don't tie it in firmly, you tend to get a little twisting. And you just wrap forward to the jig head. Make a nice full body. Salt water, it seems to be particularly important. Tie that off. And then what I like to do as a final touch, I started doing this more recently, is to add a little bit of orange towards the head. I think I've seen sand fleas, particularly when they're ready to lay eggs, have a little bit of orange color into them. I think the orange tends to make the fly stand out a little more, makes it more visible. It's a small fly, so you may need that. And what I use for the orange, you can use orange, fluorescent orange thread, or what I like to use is micropolar chenille, hot orange. You get that from Hairline Dubbing, a variety of sources. Just tie in about 3 or 4 wraps of that, just to give some orange coloration up there. Tie that off, and then simply the fly is about done now. All you have to do is whip finish. With monofilament, I find it tends to slip. So instead of giving 3 or 4 wraps on my whip finish, I generally like to give about 8 or so wraps to really fully secure that. Pull it off, pull down tight to get that seated well, and then snip it off, and that essentially is your fly. Again, you can see these fibers flare out at about a 45-degree angle. I think that's I think it's important. I've tried various angles. That seems to be the best angle for me. It will maintain that 45-degree angle as long as you firmly push that into the chenille when you're tying, and that will make sure that those fibers stay where they're put. It's like any other fly. It's not a fly for all occasions. I think it's a good alternate fly. If nothing else is working, I generally turn to this fly if I want action. If I want something and I'm not getting any hits on what I'm using, I'll use this to give it a try. It's works best off the beach, but like I said, it can be effective off the flats too, with that slightly different retrieve. I've taken some really nice sheepshead on this fly.